Story 1. The cabin that wasn't meant to save me. If you ever find shelter in the middle of nowhere, make sure it's actually meant to protect you. Because sometimes the wilderness doesn't need to hunt you. Sometimes it just waits for you to walk into the trap. I used to believe the forest purified people, that if you walked far enough past highways, past cell towers, past the constant electric hum of civilization, you eventually reached something honest, something clean, something untouched by human cruelty. At 25, I believed isolation was healing. At 25, I was wrong. I had been backpacking solo for years by then. The Appalachian backcountry felt like a second home. Long stretches without seeing another soul didn't scare me. They reset me. I liked the silence, real silence. The kind where your ears ring because there's no machinery, no traffic, no distant televisions bleeding through walls. Just wind, just leaves, just the slow breathing of trees that have been standing longer than you've been alive. That particular trip wasn't meant to be special. 3 days, moderate elevation, off a lesser used trail I'd marked months earlier. I told no one exactly where I'd be, just the general forest region. I liked the idea of disappearing temporarily. The first day went perfectly. The air was crisp and cool, early autumn biting just enough to keep you moving. The sky was so blue it felt artificial, stretched thin and endless overhead. I made good time. My boots hit the dirt in a steady rhythm. By late afternoon, I found a shallow creek and set up camp nearby. No strange tracks, no broken branches, no signs of other hikers, just forest. That night, I slept like a stone. If there were warnings, I missed them. The second day is when everything shifted. It started small, the wind sharpened, not stronger, sharper. Like it had teeth, the sky dimmed in a way that didn't feel natural. Not clouds slowly gathering, but as if someone had drawn a massive gray curtain across the sun in a single motion. By early afternoon, the horizon had turned the color of bruised steel. I checked my map. I was deeper than usual, further from the main trail than I'd planned. I'd taken a detour earlier that morning, nothing dramatic, just curiosity pulling me toward higher ground. That curiosity put me exactly where I shouldn't have been. Thunder rolled, not distant, close, too close. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like stepping into a cellar. Goosebumps raced up my arms. The forest shifted into a different mood. Quieter, tighter. Then the rain came. It wasn't gradual. It slammed down. Within seconds, I was soaked through. The trail became mud beneath my boots. Water streamed down my face, blinding me. Lightning cracked somewhere behind the ridge, the flash so bright it bleached the world white for a heartbeat. I was exposed on high ground wearing a metal-framed pack, a perfect lightning rod. Panic crept in, not wild panic, but calculated fear. I needed lower ground. I needed cover, not trees, not open slope, something solid. That's when I saw it. Through sheets of rain and bending trees, a shape cut against the natural lines of the forest, straight edges. Hard angles, wrong. A structure. My pulse jumped. A cabin. Relief hit so hard my knees almost buckled. I actually laughed, one sharp, disbelieving sound swallowed by thunder. I half slid down the slope toward it, boots losing traction in the mud. The clearing was small, almost swallowed by dense trees. The cabin leaned slightly, wood aged to gray, metal roof, rattling under the assault of rain. No smoke, no vehicles, no footprints visible in the flooding ground, but it stood firm. It looked abandoned. And in that storm, abandoned meant salvation. I didn't knock. I threw the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, but not decayed. Dim light filtered through a single small window. There was a cot frame along one wall, a narrow wooden table, a rusted lantern, and a stone fireplace layered with old ash. It smelled wrong, Damp wood, yes, but underneath that metal, faint, sharp, still it was dry. I dropped my pack with a thud and peeled off my soaked jacket. My hands shook slightly from cold and adrenaline. Rain hammered the metal roof so violently it felt like the world was collapsing above me. For 10 minutes, relief erased everything else. I lay flat on the wooden floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rage. Safe, that's what I told myself. Safe. Then curiosity returned. And curiosity has a way of digging up things comfort tries to bury. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through dust and shadow. That's when the details surfaced. In the far corner lay a sleeping bag, not ancient, not mole, eaten, just dusty. Nearby were 2 plastic water jugs, still sealed. 3 canned goods, labels intact, not rusted through. Someone had been here, recently. My breathing slowed. I stood and walked toward the door, running my light along the frame. Scratches, deep ones. At first glance, they looked random. Up close, they were anything but. They clustered around handle height. Long, jagged gouges carved into the wood. Not animal marks, too focused, too desperate. My stomach tightened. I stepped outside briefly, rain soaking me instantly, and examined the latch. The locking bracket was mounted on the outside. Outside, you could secure the door from out there, not from inside. The realization didn't come all at once. It seeped in, cold. I stepped back inside and turned toward the window. Small, square, I pushed, it didn't budge. I angled the flashlight along the frame, screws driven in from the outside. And along the inner wood more gouges, long, frantic, dragged inward. Someone had tried to get out. The air inside the cabin shifted. It felt heavier, closer. This wasn't a shelter. It was modified for containment. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was an old hunting storage cabin. Maybe someone secured it against animals. But instinct doesn't whisper without reason. And mine was screaming now. The storm intensified, branches slamming into the walls. I checked my watch. If I left now, I'd be exposed again on high ground. Lightning still cracking. I weighed the risks. Storm outside. Unknown inside. I made the wrong choice. I stayed. Time crawled. Rain masked everything until a new sound slipped through. Scraping, faint, along the left wall. I held my breath. It stopped. Then 2 heavy thuds hit the porch. Not debris, not branches. Footsteps, slow, measured, circling. My pulse slammed in my ears. The door creaked. Not violently, just pressure, like someone leaning their weight against it, testing it. The storm seemed distant now. Muted, as if the clearing had become its own world. One thought locked into place. Why circle a cabin in a storm? Unless you don't want to come inside, unless you want whoever is inside to stay there. Panic detonated in my chest. I grabbed my pack. That's when the window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor, and fire followed. Flames raced across the wall unnaturally fast, too fast, like invisible lines had been laid in advance. The room filled with smoke instantly. My lungs seized. I lunged for the door. It wouldn't open. It was being held. From outside, I slammed into it once, twice, wood splintered. Heat surged behind me. On the third hit, the hinges tore loose and I fell into mud and rain. I didn't look back. I ran, blinded by smoke and storm. Branches slashed my face. My boots slipped. My chest burned. Then something hit me from behind. We crashed into the mud. Hands locked around my throat. He didn't speak. He made this raw, animal sound rage without language. His face hovered inches from mine, rain washing over both of us. I couldn't see details, just a silhouette, eyes wide. I drove my elbow upward blindly. He grunted, slipped. I tore free and ran again. Behind me, the cabin roared like an inferno. I expected him every second. Expected hands grabbing my back again, but he didn't. I ran until my legs failed. crawled under a fallen tree, pressed into wet earth, waited for hours listening. Every snap of a twig felt like him returning. He never did. When morning came, gray and hollow, I could see the clearing from a distance. The cabin was a charred skeleton, black beams rising from mud, no movement, no body. I made it to a road by noon. A passing driver took me to a ranger station. Police searched. They found no footprints around the cabin that could be preserved. Rain had erased everything. No remains, no accelerant containers, no explanation for how a rain-soaked structure ignited like it had been primed. But I know what I saw, the screws, the scratches, the outside latch. That cabin wasn't abandoned, it was prepared. Prepared for someone desperate enough to run inside during a storm. Prepared to hold them, prepared to burn. I used to think the wilderness purified you. Now I understand something else. The woods don't care if you survive. And sometimes they help someone else make sure you don't. I never backpacked alone again, because some shelters aren't built to save you. They're built to keep you. Story 2. The light beneath the tower, if the stairs hadn't been missing, I might have convinced myself none of it happened. That's the detail that keeps me awake. Not the light, not the shadow, not the footsteps climbing toward us in the dark. The stairs, steel doesn't just disappear. Charles was the kind of person who treated no trespassing signs like invitations. He had a talent for finding places that weren't supposed to be found, abandoned factories with broken windows yawning like empty eye sockets, hospitals swallowed whole by ivy, houses so deep in woods they no longer existed on county records. He called them forgotten spaces. He believed forgotten places carried stories. I believed him. At least I did before the tower. He found it the way he found most things, through a half-buried forum thread and satellite images. An old fire lookout tower decommissioned decades ago. 4 miles beyond any marked trail, no fencing, no signage, just a rusting spine of steel rising above an ocean of trees. 70 feet tall, still standing. Barely. We parked at the edge of a gravel service road just before sunset and hiked in with flashlights and a couple of cheap beers in our packs. The forest thickened the farther we walked. No trail markers, no boot prints, just layers of pine needles and the occasional animal track crossing our path. I remember noticing how quiet it was, not peaceful, vacant. Birdsong faded the deeper we went. Even insects seemed absent. The wind moved through branches, but it carried no life with it. When the trees finally thinned, the tower rose in the clearing like a forgotten monument. It looked wrong, not because it was abandoned, but because it was still standing. The steel legs were streaked with rust. The spiral staircase wrapped around the frame like a ribcage. The small cabin at the top, just a square box with windows on all sides, leaned slightly as if tired. Still solid, Charles said, already stepping toward it. I hesitated. The clearing felt off. There was no underbrush around the base. No saplings reclaiming the space. Just bare dirt in a wide circle, as if something regularly moved there. I told myself that was paranoia. Urban explorer bravado took over. We started climbing. The first step groaned beneath my boot. The second let out a high metallic whine. Rust flaked away with each movement. The higher we went, the more the wind tugged at the structure, making it sway almost imperceptibly. Halfway up, I looked down and instantly regretted it. The forest floor already seemed distant. The trees closed in around the clearing like silent witnesses. "Don't think about it," Charles called from above. "Just keep moving." The final stretch was a vertical ladder enclosed in a cylindrical steel cage. The cage rattled violently as we climbed, amplifying every shift of weight. When we finally pulled ourselves onto the narrow platform at the top, the fear melted away. The view was unreal. Miles of forest canopy rolled out in every direction, an endless sea of green fading into blue haze along the horizon. The sun was sinking, staining the sky orange and crimson. For a moment, the world felt enormous and untouched. We cracked open our beers and leaned against the railing. "This," Charles said, gesturing outward, "is why we do it." I nodded. Up there, above the trees, it felt safe. Darkness fell faster than expected. It didn't creep in, it dropped. One moment, the forest was textured and alive with detail. The next, it collapsed into a single mass of black. There was no moon, no distant farmhouse lights, no headlights on a distant road, just void. The air grew colder. Charles stood and, without thinking, smacked his metal bottle against the railing. The clang rang out like a bell. It echoed far longer than it should have. The sound didn't just fade. It stretched, reverberating through the trees in waves. "Don't," I muttered. He was already frozen. "Do you see that?" He whispered. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Then movement, far below, weaving between the trees. A light, white, bright, perfectly steady, not flickering like a lantern, not jittering like a flashlight held in a human hand. It glided, smoothly, effortlessly. It moved through dense forest without dimming, without obstruction. Branches should have blocked it. Trunks should have broken the beam. They didn't. My chest tightened. "It's probably a ranger," I said, though even I didn't believe it. As if in response, the light accelerated. Not gradually. It zipped forward in a blur covering impossible ground in a fraction of a second, then resumed its slow, measured drift. My breath caught. No human could move like that in that terrain. We both went completely still. The light approached the base of the tower and stopped directly beneath us, 70 feet below. It didn't sway. It didn't scan upward. It just sat there. Watching, Charles leaned over the railing. "Hey," he shouted. His voice dropped into the darkness and vanished. No answer. The light remained fixed. 5 minutes passed, 10, 30. Neither of us moved. My legs began to tremble, not from height, but from the crushing awareness of being observed. Then the light vanished, not dimmed, not switched off, gone, like someone had erased it. That was worse, because if it was a person, they had to still be down there, somewhere, in the dark. We retreated into the small cabin at the top of the tower. The interior was cramped, just enough space for 2 people to stand shoulder to shoulder, windows on all sides. A warped wooden door that barely latched. Charles locked it anyway. We stood there in silence, listening. At first there was nothing. Then came the scraping, metal on metal, slow, deliberate, circling the base. The sound traveled up the steel frame, vibrating faintly through the floor beneath our boots. It wasn't random movement. It was measured, mapping, testing. Something struck one of the tower's legs with force. The entire structure shuddered. Charles swore under his breath. Then footsteps, on metal, climbing. The staircase groaned, 1 step at a time. Unhurried, intentional, we stared at the door. The metal shrieked softly as weight shifted upward, higher. Higher, my pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps stopped at our level, 70 feet above ground. There was no knock, no voice, just stillness. Then a shadow passed across the window, at eye height. Not below us, not far off in the trees, at eye level, as if something stood on the narrow platform outside. I couldn't breathe. Charles pressed his back against the door. I braced it with him. The handle rattled once. Softly, not a violent attempt to break in. Just pressure, testing. Minutes stretched impossibly long. The shadow didn't move again. No more footsteps. No retreating sounds. Just presence. At some point, exhaustion blurred the edges of fear. We stayed braced against the door, barely speaking, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. When pale light finally filtered through the windows, it felt unreal. Morning, the forest below looked normal, calm. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, as if nothing had happened. We opened the door slowly. The platform was empty. No marks, no scratches, no sign anyone had stood there. We scanned the clearing below. Nothing. No footprints visible from that height. No light, no figure. "See," Charles said weakly. "Probably just someone messing with us." I didn't answer. We started down. The staircase felt more unstable in daylight. Each step creaked louder than before. Halfway down, I glanced at the ground. Still empty. 3/4 of the way, Charles stopped so abruptly I nearly collided with him. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just pointed downward. My stomach dropped. 8 feet below us, the staircase ended. Not broken, not bent. Ended. An entire section of steel steps, roughly 4 feet of spiral, was gone. Cleanly detached. No jagged edges. No twisted remains. Just open air where steps had been the night before. We stared at the gap in disbelief. "That wasn't like this yesterday," Charles muttered. "It wasn't. I would have noticed." There were no metal pieces on the ground below. No tools. No sign of forced removal. Just absence. Someone, or something, had dismantled a section of steel staircase while we stood above it. Without making enough noise for us to understand what was happening, the realization hit me slowly. The footsteps we heard, they had stopped at our level, but what if they hadn't been climbing up? What if they'd been removing steps below? Trapping us? The thought made my skin crawl. We had no choice. We jumped. The drop wasn't enormous, but enough. Charles landed badly. His ankle twisted under him with a sickening sound. He screamed and collapsed. I hauled him up, adrenaline overriding everything. We didn't look back. We didn't stop until we reached the tree line. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the clearing, waiting. We reported the missing steps to local authorities days later. They investigated, found nothing. No removed steel sections. No cut marks. No evidence of tools. According to them, the staircase had been that way for years. It hadn't. I know what I climbed. We never went exploring like that again, because something came to that tower that night. It moved through trees without obstruction. It stood at eye level 70 feet in the air, and it altered steel like it was rearranging pieces on a board. The stairs were missing, and I don't think that was random. I think it wanted to see what we would do. When we realized we couldn't come down, Story 3, the trees that shouldn't fall if you spend enough nights alone in the wilderness, you learn the language of it. Not the romantic version, people. Imagine the gentle rustle of leaves, the soft hoot of an owl, but the real language. The warning snaps, the territorial growls, the way wind travels through pine versus oak, the difference between a deer stepping on deadfall and something heavier shifting its weight. I've camped alone for 15 years, 15 years of backcountry trails, of hiking past the last marked signs, of choosing campsites miles from the nearest human voice. I know how trees fall. I know what makes them fall. Wrought lightning, saturated soil, wind shear. What happened in that forest wasn't natural. It was late autumn in Daniel Boone National Forest, the kind of cold that sharpens smells and makes the sky painfully clear. Most campers avoid that time of year, which is exactly why I prefer it. Fewer people, quieter woods, cleaner air. It was supposed to be a 3-day solo trip, nothing extreme. I parked at a rarely used trailhead just before dusk and hiked in about 5 miles before setting up camp in a shallow clearing surrounded by hardwoods. The ground was dry, no storm forecast, no wind advisory, just cold stillness. The first night was calm. I fell asleep easily at around 2 a.m. I woke up, not from a noise, not from a dream, just that instinctive jolt that sometimes pulls you from sleep when something feels off. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw it. Orange light flickering through the thin nylon wall of my tent. Not bright, not raging, just steady, rhythmic, a campfire, 200 yards away, judging by the intensity and the angle of the glow. Small, controlled. I lay perfectly still, listening. No voices, no laughter, no movement around it. That alone was strange. Even the quietest campers shift logs, cough, unzip gear. Fire is rarely silent company. The glow burned steadily for about 5 minutes. I counted. Then it went out instantly, not dimmed, not smothered gradually, gone. Darkness swallowed the forest so completely it felt like the light had never existed. I waited, listened, nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd misjudged distance. Maybe it had been farther away than I thought. Maybe terrain had hidden the ash. Maybe someone had packed up fast. Morning came pale and brittle. I walked in the direction of the glow. 200 yards, then 3, then 4. No ash, no charred wood, no disturbed soil. Leaves lay undisturbed, crisp with frost. If someone had built a fire there, they'd done it on bare stone and removed every trace. Possible. Unlikely. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd seen strange things before. Light plays tricks at night. The second day passed uneventfully. I hiked, fished briefly at a narrow creek, returned to camp before dark. The forest felt normal again, birds flitting, squirrels arguing in the canopy. Ordinary. Night fell hard. The temperature dropped fast enough that my breath fogged inside the tent. I checked my watch before rolling onto my side. 2:07 a.m. I don't know why I looked at 2:13 a.m. The forest split open. A crack thundered through the trees so violently that I bolted upright before I realized I'd moved. It wasn't the slow creaking lean of a tree surrendering to wind. It was explosive, a tree falling, but there was no wind. No gust, no rustling canopy, just impact. The ground trembled faintly. I waited. 10 minutes later, another crash. Closer, from a different direction. I could map it in my head. First northeast, now southwest, encircling. Then came the sound I cannot explain, a low, resonating groan that seemed to rise from beneath the soil itself. Not animal, no cadence, no breathing pattern, not mechanical, too organic. It vibrated through the ground and into my ribs, as if the earth were exhaling something ancient and heavy. It lasted nearly a full minute. My rifle was in my hands before I consciously reached for it. Silence followed. Kind of silence that isn't absence of sound but absence of life. No insects, no night birds, no small mammals rustling through leaves. The forest felt paused. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me back into shallow sleep. At dawn, frost coated everything in a fragile white film. I followed the direction of the first crash. It didn't take long to find the tree. It lay on its side, massive roots partially exposed. But it hadn't snapped clean. The trunk looked torn. Fibers shredded outward like wet rope ripped apart. Hardwood doesn't do that easily. It splinters, it cracks along stress lines. This looked twisted. Deep gouges marked the bark about 8 feet up the trunk. Parallel impressions, as if something had gripped and torqued. I crouched, tracing one gouge with my glove. Not claw marks, too wide, too evenly spaced. Then I noticed something blue near the lower branches. My stomach dropped. A blue bandana and a carabiner clipped loosely around a twig. Mine, they had been in my pack. Inside my tent, I knew that with absolute certainty. The bandana was tied around a small pouch I kept in the inner pocket. The carabiner clipped my keys to a loop. I hadn't heard my zipper open, hadn't felt movement, hadn't smelled anything unfamiliar. Something had entered my tent while I slept, taken them, carried them at least 100 yards, placed them on the fallen tree. Displayed them deliberately. It wasn't random scattering. It was presentation, a message. I didn't rationalize. I didn't debate wildlife possibilities. I packed in under 5 minutes. My movements were automatic: sleeping bag compressed, tent stakes yanked free, gear shoved without its usual careful organization. As I zipped my pack shut, another crack exploded through the woods, closer than before. Too close. I didn't walk. I ran. The trail curved unevenly through undergrowth and narrow ridgelines, but I didn't slow down. Branches slapped my shoulders. Leaves slid beneath my boots. Behind me, I heard nothing. That was worse. Every instinct screamed not to look back. Halfway to the trailhead, lungs burning, I made the mistake of glancing over my shoulder. Between the trees far behind me, something moved, not clearly, not fully formed, but tall, taller than the surrounding brush. Its motion wasn't like a person weaving between trunks. It was smoother, as if distance meant nothing. I didn't wait for clarity. I ran until I saw the dull shine of my truck through the trees. I locked the doors the second I climbed in. Sat there shaking, engine off, listening for footsteps that never came. Police did search the area. They found no signs of forced entry into my tent, no torn fabric, no footprints distinguishable from my own, no unusual animal tracks, but they did find 3 additional trees downed within a half-mile radius. All torn, not cut, not wind, felled, each displaying the same shredded fiber pattern, no chainsaw residue. No lightning strikes, just raw force. They chalked it up to rare structural weakness combined with ground instability. I didn't argue. I still camp, but I don't go as deep anymore. I avoid certain parts of that forest entirely. And sometimes when I wake at 2 a.m. and the woods feel too quiet, I remember that groan vibrating through the earth. That fire with no ash. Those trees twisted apart like brittle toys. And the careful way something handled my belongings. Because animals don't stage messages, and storms don't move gear from inside sealed tents. The woods don't always hunt you. Sometimes they study you first.